Welcome to Conversations at the Crossroads, the podcast where spirituality meets the beautifully messy experience of being human. I'm Jenny, tarot reader, Reiki practitioner, witch, mentor, hairstylist, and the voice behind Hex and Hair. Each week, we gather here at the Crossroads to explore spirituality, personal growth, and the tools that help us navigate an ever-evolving human journey. Some conversations will dive into the mystical, others into the practical, and sometimes we'll sit together with the hard stuff along the way. We may explore ideas that challenge us, stories that shift our perspective, or practices that help us walk our path with a little more intention. So wherever you're listening from, take a breath, settle in, and join me at the crossroads. Welcome, friends, back to Conversations at the Crossroads, where we wander between worlds, where history, myth, and spirit meet. The last couple weeks, I've had some amazing guests, but I thought I would slow it down and kind of come back and do another solo episode. This subject is on my mind a lot this time of year when March rolls around, and the subject comes up on my mind a lot this time of year, and I talk about it with all the people around me, and it's interesting to get lots of different people's takes, especially being in the spiritual community. But as March graces us again, the world turns green and shamrocks appear in every window and laughter spills out from doorways and the name of St. Patrick echoes everywhere. But today I want to turn away from the surface celebration and go a little deeper beneath the parades and pints. As somebody whose ancestry and heritage is very green, coming from Scotland and Ireland, lots of UK, I feel like I owe it to my ancestors to give another perspective and go back to the soil and the song and the soul of Ireland herself. And it may not be the most popular opinion, and people may disagree, and that's okay. Let me know what your thoughts on this take, but hear me out. Just hear me out and listen. And if at the end you may just have a more layered perspective. I want to return to the stories that predate sainthood and empire. I want to go back to the stories of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Aoshi, the Shining Ones, also known as the Fae. This episode isn't just about fairy lore, but we'll have some of it. And it's about remembering a heritage of magic that was stolen and rewritten and buried, but never destroyed. Because, like the Fae themselves, our magic doesn't die. It may retreat underground for a time and wait for the right time to rise again. According to the Laborg Bala Éireann, or the Book of Invasions, the Tuatha Dé Danann came to Ireland in ships veiled by clouds and mist. Some say they came from the Northern Isles, carrying with them the 4 sacred treasures, each one a symbol of mastery and balance. The sword of Nuada, which struck unerringly. The spear of Lu, which guaranteed victory. The cauldron of the Dagda, from which none went unsatisfied. And the stone of Fall, which cried out beneath the rightful king. These weren't just weapons or tools, they were energetic anchors. They were artifacts, reminding us that sovereignty, wisdom, sustenance, and skill are the 4 pillars of divine order. The Tuatha were radiant, gods of craft, healing, and poetry. Nuada of the silver hand, Lu of many talents, Brigid, the goddess of flame, healing, and inspiration, the Dagda, whose laughter echoed through creation, and at the root of them all, Danu, the mother, the river, the flowing source from which their name is born. Danu is an archetypal divine feminine, the current of creation itself. She moves through rivers and breath, through art and womb, through time. The Tua are said to be her children, the luminous ones shaped from her wisdom and her waters. The Tua ruled with harmony, but their story, like all myths, carries the ache of change. When the Malaysians, or the ancestors of mortal humanity, arrived, the old gods faced defeat. They didn't die, though. The myths tell us that they descended into the hills, the rivers, the mists, into the Sídhe. The places that we call fairy mounds became their new kingdoms, portals to the otherworld, where time runs sideways and the air vibrates with memory. There they became the Aoshi, the shining hidden folk, the Fae. This descent wasn't exile, it was evolution. It tells us that when power shifts, true magic doesn't end, it transforms. The divine retreats below the surface, just as our own ancestral magic did under centuries of suppression. For centuries, the people of Ireland didn't worship the Fae. They coexisted with them. The relationship was one of respect and reciprocity. Offerings of cream, honey, or bread were left at thresholds and wells. Children were warned not to cut down lone hawthorn trees. They were the Fae's sacred resting places, or else they would invite their mischief. Builders left parts of the land untouched, acknowledging the otherworld's domain. Every gesture said the same thing. We remember you. We honor you. We live beside you. It was an understanding that the world is alive, that every hill, stream, and stone holds consciousness. The quote-unquote otherworld wasn't a distant heaven or hell, but an invisible layer of this one, shimmering and just beyond sight. To forget that was to lose connection, to live half awake in a living dream. The Druids, the poets, and the seers were keepers of this understanding. They were not sorcerers in the modern sense, but mediators between realms. The Druids read omens in the trees, the flow of rivers, the flight of birds. They memorized lore and used language not as communication, but as invocation. They believed that to name something was to awaken it. Words had soul. Poetry was spell work. So when I speak the names of the Tua, Danu, Brigid, Lu, Nuada, Dagda, I'm not reciting myth. I'm calling memory back through language. Druidic practice wasn't about power over nature. It was about partnership with it. The Fae embodied that same philosophy. To speak with the hidden folk was to rejoin the conversation of creation itself. And then silence. When Christianity spread through the land and Catholicism, the Druids and the old gods were pushed aside. The Tua were reduced to the fairies, their temples repurposed, their stories rewritten. St. Patrick's tale told of banishing the snakes. If you can't tell, I have a little contempt there. But the truth, the snakes were never literal. They symbolized the old pagan traditions, sacred to this earth. The temples were turned into churches, the goddesses into saints, the bards into heretics. But what the conquerors never understood is myth doesn't die. When you banish a god, they slip into story. When you silence a people, their magic just learns to whisper. The Fae became symbols of survival, spiritual rebellion wrapped in beauty and mischief. They said, you may take the land, but you cannot take its soul. And if we listen closely, that's what the Fae teach us, even now. How to reclaim what was stolen without bitterness, how to adapt, how to shift form, and still sing. The Fae teach us subversion through grace. They remind us that magic is rooted in relationship, but also in self-sovereignty. They mirror the parts of us that refuse to conform, the parts that still remember rhythm and reverence. And most of all, they remind us that the oppressors can never truly win. Magic can be outlawed, ridiculed, or commercialized, but not erased. Like the Tua beneath the hills, it waits for the heart brave enough to knock. Among the Tuatha Dé Danann, there is one figure whose flame who has never truly gone out. Brigid, the daughter of Dagda, goddess of fire, poetry, healing, smithcraft, and the hearth. Her name means exalted one, and she stands with one foot in the realm of inspiration and one in everyday life. In the old stories, Brigid married Brez, a king of Tuatha who is half Fomorian, a half god, a union meant to bring peace between warring powers, but it doesn't last. Brez becomes a cruel, unjust ruler. War returns, and in the conflict, Brigid's son, Ruadan, dies on the battlefield, struck down by the smith god Gavnu. Brigid's grief is so immense that she begins to keen, to cry out with a raw, wailing lament. And the lore says that this was the first keening ever heard in Ireland. Her sorrow becomes a ritual language of mourning that people still echo generations later. It's a tradition to loudly embody your grief, to let it out, to wail and let it be known. I love this story because it shows how Brigid is not a distant, spotless goddess, but as a mother and a peace weaver, a witness to violence and loss. Her magic is not just in fire and poetry, it's in the refusal to let grief go silent. She turns pain into song, into ritual, into a tradition that carries the dead and heals the living. In that way, Brigid is a bridge. She links the Tua and Fae, goddess and saint, old religion and new. They even sainted her in the Catholic Church because the Irish people just could not give her up. She was just so important to their culture. She became Saint Bridget. She is proof that you can try to overwrite a deity and rename her and repurpose her, and still her flame finds a way to burn on in the people. When we talk about our magic being stolen or rewritten, Brigid reminds us what survival looks like. The goddess became a saint. The keening became custom. The rituals became folk practice. But the current underneath, that river of Danu, never stopped flowing. That's the same current that feeds the Fae. When we feel disconnected from our intuition, our ancestral roots, our creativity, that's our quote unquote otherworld calling. The Fae are not just winged sprites or tricksters, but also they are metaphors for the untamed essence of life itself, testing whether we treat mystery with respect or exploitation. To work with Fae energy is to honor mystery, to remember that not everything sacred can be seen or explained or possessed. I want to shift now into more of a teaching moment because a lot of us grew up with cartoon fairies and lucky leprechauns, and that's not quite the full story. In Irish tradition, the Fae are often called the Aoshi or the Dinashi, the people of the mounds, understood as descendants or transformed forms of the Tuatha Dé Danann. They are powerful spirits of the land, of fate, of the in-between. Not just tiny glitter creatures, but shining folk. Sometimes indistinguishable from humans, sometimes overwhelming and otherworldly. Within that broad category, there are many kinds of beings. There's the Dinashi, noble fairy hosts connected to the ancient gods, seen riding in companies, feasting, or dancing in the hills. There are household fae, like the Banti, a house spirit who tends to the home and looks after children and animals, similar to a brownie. but distinctly Irish. There are land guardians, such as spirits of hawthorn trees or certain hills and wells, who protect specific sites. There's the banshee, a fairy woman who keens for the dead and sometimes foretells a death, echoing that brigid like lamentation across time. There's a trickster or solitary fae, like a leprechaun, a shoemaker spirit associated with gold, music, and pranks, still rooted in the fairy realm despite being commercialized now. And all of these share a few traits. They guard thresholds, they respond to respect and reciprocity, and they rarely fit neatly into good or evil. They're more like the weather, powerful, changeable, deserving of caution and reverence. If you feel called to work with the Fae, here are some do's and don'ts based on Irish folklore, modern practice, and my own experience. Do approach with respect, not entitlement. You're building a relationship, not ordering room service. Do start with the land itself. Care for plants, pick up trash, tend a small patch of earth, sometimes little potted plants outside of your door to give them somewhere to play. Do make simple, heartfelt offerings. Traditionally, this might be cream, milk, butter, bread. I like to use honey or flowers, a small bit of clean water left at a tree, a crossroads, or a chosen outdoor spot. Do pay attention to dreams and synchronicities and subtle nudges. The Fae often communicate symbolically rather than in big, flashy visions. Do set boundaries, just like with any other spirit work. You can say, only benevolent, aligned beings may approach. Anything else, leave in peace. For the don'ts, don't demand proof or spectacle. Testing them like they owe you something is a fast track to mischief or silence or losing your keys. Don't disrespect known fairy places. In Irish lore, cutting a lone hawthorn, disturbing a fairy mound, or building over certain sites is taboo and invites trouble. Don't treat them as cute fantasy props. They're ancient, complex beings. Trivializing them can skew the energy you attract. It's kind of like being infantilized. Nobody really likes that. Don't bargain away your sovereignty. Never promise anything, quote unquote, in exchange for help. Be specific and ethical in your agreements. Don't work with them if you're in a chaotic, unstable place without strong grounding. Start with ancestors and guides and land spirits first. Then move into fairy work when you have a solid spiritual hygiene and protections. Think of it this way. Fairy magic is like sailing the otherworld's ocean. You want to know your boat, your charts, and your own heart before you go out courting the storms. Also, instead of saying thank you, which might imply being indebted, you can say, I appreciate this, or something to that effect. When I think of the phrase, the snakes were driven out, I can almost hear the land laugh because the snakes didn't go anywhere. They shed their skins. They became storytellers, witches, poets, and dreamers. They danced their way into folklore and art, carrying the same pulse that once guided the Druids and the Tuatha. The Fae are proof that rebellion and beauty can coexist. They are wild and curious and playful and fierce. And to embody their magic today is to stand at the same crossroads between worlds, refusing to believe that enchantment is naive, that reverence is weakness, or that art is frivolous. The Fae are the laughter of the earth after colonization, the spark that says, we are still here. Our magic survived. Our stories still matter. So, how do we in 2026 weave fairy wisdom into our modern lives? Well, we do it by living as if the land is alive, because it is. We nourish relationships with place. We plant herbs with intention, like having rosemary by your back door. Very similar in a lot of forms of witchcraft. We speak gratitude aloud to the running water, to the wind, to the moon. I often tell people who are just beginning witchcraft that sometimes one of the most powerful spells you can do is just speak your intention into the wind. We write poetry and we refuse to stop believing in beauty. We stop calling ourselves too sensitive when what we really are is attuned. We have intuition. We protect the sacred in ourselves and the world around us, just like our ancestors did with offerings of milk at fairy mounds. Every candle lit, every intuitive act, every small act of reverence is an offering. That's how we honor the Fae. That's how we reconnect with the current they carry. As we close, I invite you to imagine the Irish mists rolling over the green hills. Beneath the grass, the Tua still whisper. The Fae still gather in moonlight. Danu still flows through every stream, her waters nourishing all that endures. And somewhere deep, in the roots, the rivers, the dreams of those who still remember, the serpents coil, alive and watchful. They were never destroyed, simply hidden. The snakes survived. We survived. The beauty that lives in the roots of magic cannot be killed. The oppressors could not silence the poets. They could not drain the wells of inspiration. They could not extinguish the flame that Brigid still tends in every heart that remembers. The Fae are that flame, the continuation of wonder, the reminder that even buried magic grows back stronger. So, as I usually do, here are some questions that you can reflect on or journal about to see how these things may relate to your life and how you may find some substance for your own journey. What stories from your own ancestry or culture carry echoes of magic, myth, or unseen worlds? When was the last time you felt the land or nature respond to you in a meaningful way? Personally, there's something about when it rains that I just connect to. Feeling the water come down and cleanse the earth and nourish the earth. And yeah, sometimes it's a little chaotic, but that's feelings. What parts of your spiritual or creative self were once silenced or shamed and are ready to rise again? The Fae value reciprocity, beauty, and mystery. How can you embody these in your day-to-day life? And if your magic had a voice, what would it say to you today? So, as you step into this season, may you reclaim your own sovereignty, the one written in your bones. Honor the unseen world with reverence. Speak to the land. Light your inner fire. And when you feel yourself doubting, remember this. Magic survives because we do. Blessed be, and may the shining ones walk beside you always. If you'd like to find more of me, feel free to check me out on all of the social media as @hexandhair on TikTok, Instagram. You can visit my website at hexandhair.com. So as always, be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself, but also remember you're powerful. I can't wait to see you again on the crossroads. Take care. Bye.